I'm Anne Lever. I'm an artist. I live in Cheshire, in the country, surrounded by green fields, old trees. There's a wood outside the window. The Derbyshire Hills are not far away. I describe myself as a landscape painter, but that doesn't really cover it. I think what I'm trying to do is to paint my response to a landscape at that moment when I'm in it or when I'm thinking about it. So I'm trying to capture my feelings for that place. So that would include its geography, its history, the marks man's made on the landscape, the weather, the light. And in trying to work out what has led me to this, I've been thinking about the influences way back in my family and where I was brought up. Brought up in Sussex, in a house on the edge of a very small town called Seaford, on the Downs, overlooking a beautiful river valley called the Cuckmere, very close to the sea, the white cliffs of the Seven Sisters, and the beaches, the shingle beaches. So surrounded by very beautiful downland country. There must have been something in me intrinsic that was always going to be sensitive to atmosphere. But it really helped, I think, to have a father who triggered my imagination from a very young age. He was a storyteller, he was well read, he read his poetry, had a very vivid historical imagination and would take us to castles and old houses, expeditions off at dawn to see the migrating birds gathering in the valley in the Downs before taking off across the channel in their great black cloud. I was also brought up in a family where there were a lot of paintings on the walls, watercolours, probably Victorian watercolours done by aunts and great aunts and grandmothers. And I think it seemed quite a natural thing to be an artist. Added to which, being artistic was greatly admired, and I got a lot of encouragement for it. And I hate to say it, but in those days, I was the only granddaughter in this family, and I was the one that was given the encouragement to be artistic. The boys were expected to do other things. So as well as these things of the imagination, I was also just outside a lot, playing outside, running around in the garden and the fields and climbing trees, quite a lot of time on the beach and swimming and on the cliffs. And yes, being outside in nature. And then later on, we would go to Scotland quite a lot to visit some family, some cousins, and there was a lot of just being outside in the wilderness and climbing hills with them and just getting to know and love, really, the wilderness and not being afraid of it. So I think Wordsworth comes close to explaining this feeling in his poem Lines Written Above Tintern Abbey. And I have felt a presence that disturbs me with the joy of elevated thoughts, a sense sublime of something far more deeply infused, whose dwelling is... So finally, just to round this off, I was sent to a very small girls' school where the art teaching was very old-fashioned. The woman that taught us was trained at the Slade School of Art, and we did all the basics. We drew and drew and drew, plaster casts, flowers, leaves, etc., all the basic art techniques, so that by the time I left in the sixth form, I was a very competent oil painter, and in the very much the traditional way. But it was a very unimaginative art training, and so instead of going off to art school, I actually went off to become a lawyer, and I then worked for 7 years in the city, in the law courts in London, and ultimately being a creative round peg in a legal square hole became so uncomfortable that I gave it up and decided I was going to go back and I was going to try and make a living as an artist. So I was rather encouraged to discover that actually Cézanne, who was one of my great heroes, had been a lawyer, as had quite a few of those post-impressionists, Matisse amongst them. So they too were lawyers, and so when he said something like, "Show me an ordered mind and I'll show you an artist," I thought, well, maybe all that training hasn't been in vain. Of the people I've met, the biggest influence on me was an art teacher called Robin Child. Is without a doubt the most important to me. He ran at that point an art research centre for adults. He was the teacher that I wish I'd had when I was young, but anyway, I met him eventually, and through Robin, I was introduced to the whole world of 20th century art, to modern art, if you like, to art post-Cézanne. So, as I'd had a very traditional art education, this was something completely new. And basically, he provided me with the tools for me to express myself as an artist. He introduced me to a whole new language of art, which had nothing to do with the old world of traditional painting. It was a new world in which the flat surface of the canvas was important, the geometry of the rectangle, the perspective completely different from the deep perspective that had come before. It was a shallow perspective. It was the harmony of the palette, the harmony of the colour. Everything was different. And I found this new language wonderful. So I have a huge amount to thank Robin for. But along with this, the other people I've learnt so much from are the other artists that I met through Robin, and the groups of painters I've painted with, the Rosvik group in particular. Painting with other artists is such a wonderful thing. You learn so much from each other. You just pick it up. And so those other artists I'm very grateful to. Finally, I owe a lot to somebody called Peter Boughton, who was the keeper of art at the Grosvenor Museum in Chester. He offered me my first solo show and curated it, and it was a great success, and I owe him a lot. The museum ended up acquiring 2 of my paintings for their permanent collection. So Cézanne is the most important artist for me. From him I take the importance of ordering the surface of the canvas, being conscious of the geometry of the space, the rectangle, his use of colour to transmit light from the surface of the painting, the importance of feeling. He said also, art which isn't based on feeling isn't art at all. So then the way he simplified what he saw, I think he said there are 7,000 lines in nature, but I only need 7 of them. Verticals, horizontals, diagonals, something that reflects the rectangle. Another artist is the American abstract expressionist Klein. I think what I learnt from him was this new art that I was discovering, rather late, but anyway, I was discovering. It was all to do with the expression of the hand, with the expression of the individual artist. I think one of the things he said, one of the strokes of his brush, this is me, this moment in action. This is an immediate, direct way of the painter communicating. You didn't have to be brilliant or have talent. You simply had to express yourself, and that was enough. The influential painter is Diebenkorn. He was another of the American abstract expressionists. He seemed to recognise and feel landscape. Something else he did was to never go into his studio with an idea of any sort. He was trying to draw on his experience and his unconscious mind to paint. Then finally, of the Americans, an artist called Joan Mitchell, who was an absolute master of the gesture and the expression. So I have looked at her and learnt how to walk out in the country or in a garden and then go back into the studio and simply paint what it feels like. Then in Britain, I would say the early Turners, when he was painting wonderful, and thousands of watercolour sketches, the freedom and the beauty of those I've learned a great deal from. And then backtracking a bit to Samuel Palmer and Blake, I mean, both real mystics, I think, and just giving their work such a mysterious quality, which I think then influenced what I think are called the English Romantic painters, John Piper and Graham Sutherland. Then, of course, the great Keith Vaughan, who I think is the best painter we've produced. I think he came out of the Cubist partnership of Braque and Picasso, who have also influenced me. There's Bomberg, his use of planes and colour and just the passion with which he painted. Oh, and of course there's Peter Lanyon, the Cornish painter, very much more abstract, but he was very good on what he called the placeness of place, really getting beneath the surface of a landscape. I'm trying to reduce the amount of conscious control I have when I'm painting. I want to do less of the making an image and more of finding and recognising an image. I've realised that there's a huge amount of experience of looking at landscape in my head, and I'm trying to learn how to draw on that. So I suppose it's a method of trying to bypass the conscious mind and get in touch with what's going on inside. I think the biggest challenge that painters face, or artists in general, is the loneliness of the creative process when you have to go into your studio day after day and face yourself. I think artists need other artists to talk to bounce ideas off, and getting the right balance between that and the time alone you need to create, to play around in the studio, to have the discipline to do that, to be alone. That balance is very difficult. And I'd say the other difficulty, really, and I still find this a difficult one, giving your painting the priority it really needs. To be an artist, you need to be pretty ruthless about prioritising your painting or your art. Other things that need you have to come in second place. That's the challenge. What advice would I give my younger self, I would say I spent a long time worrying when I didn't paint. I mean, there have been times in my life, particularly when I was being a lawyer, that I just wasn't painting. And it was difficult. I didn't enjoy that. It felt like something was missing. I realise now that even when you're not painting, you are still developing as an artist. You are still looking and observing and growing. I'd say don't worry too much if there are periods in your life when it's just too difficult to paint. You're still an artist and you will still be learning. When you start again, something will have changed. Yes, I'm constantly trying unconventional mediums and techniques. I've explained that I was taught how to paint in a very conventional way. So the watercolour paintings, oil paintings, all the right layers going on at all the right times, etc. But I now paint with whatever I have to hand. And I suppose the example I would give is that some of my most successful paintings have been paintings when I've got so angry with them that I've scraped and rubbed and ripped and torn and stuck on more paper and just been thoroughly destructive. And actually, sometimes those are the very best paintings. And I think sometimes you have to get to that point of despair, washing it off under the tap, scrubbing it with a scrubbing brush, scraping it off. That's all, for me, that's all part of the process. So, just to sum up, perhaps not unconventional medium, but because I do actually still use mainly oils, but I also use acrylics and watercolour, and I will use collage. These aren't exactly unconventional medium, but it's the way I use them. So I think when I start painting, I don't listen to music, but I do like listening to words. I like listening to podcasts or Radio 4, because there's something about having sort of half a mind on the talk going on in the background that just knocks out the conscious mind and enables me to hear more clearly what's going underneath, or it helps me take the conscious focus away, and it enables me to slip into a more creative state. But when I'm really painting well and I'm in the zone, I become unaware really of my surroundings, and silence can reign. Recently I've just had a rather marvellous reaction to one of my paintings. It's in a very busy restaurant, and I got an email from the owner of the restaurant, who said, "Yesterday I found myself completely lost in the detail of your painting. In the middle of a stressful day, it provided a few minutes of wonder. There is something very beautiful about the stillness of your landscapes against the constant flow and movement of a busy restaurant." Another wonderful reaction occurred fairly recently when a fully dressed piper walked into my exhibition in London with his pipes, spotted that one of the paintings was called Loch Rannoch, and offered to play for me. So he then piped the tune Loch Rannoch in front of the painting, quite beautifully. I hope that they'll be able to feel the same things that I felt when I was painting these paintings. I hope that I'm able to transmit a sense of the wonder of the natural world, I hope maybe a sense of stillness, a sense of stepping into another world outside the everyday busyness, maybe a bit of mystery and magic, but also a sense of there being something greater than ourselves out there.